Care to chat? Now that's not just an invitation, it's the title of our podcast from the Northern Ireland Social Care Council. Delighted to have you with me today. My name's Wendy Austin, and social care and social work are such enormously important parts of life here. They really came to the fore during the pandemic, and now with the crisis in the health service, they're in the news again. So what are these jobs? Who are the people who work in them? What are the routes into social care and social work? How can staff progress and develop their careers? What reforms are necessary? And how do people in these fields take care of themselves as well as their clients? Now, I know that sounds like a lot, but they're just some of the topics that we hope to address. This episode's a bit different, and it's a particular pleasure for me. If I tell you that the title is I'm a Registered Social Worker, you might not immediately think of the Northern Ireland Commissioner for Children and Young People, but that's exactly who's with me today, Koulla Yiasouma, and it's great to have you here, Koulla.
Thank you, Wendy.
Now, one of the reasons I'm particularly pleased that you're here is that you and I would have talked many times over the years, but you've always been talking about something else. So on this occasion, it's you that I want to find out about. Okay. Tell me a bit about yourself.
So, as is the title of today's discussion, I am a social worker, but and I think most people probably know that I wasn't born in Northern Ireland. I was born in London to Greek Cypriot parents. So my culture is very much Greek Cypriot, but my place is London. I'm a Londoner. But I have been. Somebody asked me the other day if I was going to leave Northern Ireland when I finished this job. But I've been in Northern Ireland living here since 1994, since just before the first ceasefire. Visiting frequently before then. So this is my home. This is my home. This is where my husband is. This is where I've raised my children. And this is where I feel I belong. So that's, if you like, a little bit about me. I'm one of two daughters to two parents who thought we would run the world. And so very secure, very safe background, very loving community, very much part of that Greek Cypriot community in North London. Massive Arsenal supporter, and my biggest achievement is our two daughters who are now 25 and 22.
What got you into social work in the first place? Was it, to what extent was it to do with the fact that you were a part of that big community and that sort of caring community? I am really unusual. I decided quite bizarrely at the age of 13, 14 that I wanted to be a probation officer. I'm not really sure where that came from. But so at the age of 13, 14, I wanted to be a probation officer. I found out from an advert that my godmother clipped out of The Guardian. I've always been a little bit liberal politics. So clipped out The Guardian, found out what I needed to do to become a probation officer, which is become a social worker, and went on that path. It was only when I was at university studying for the social work degree, the applied social studies degree with social work, that I suddenly actually interrogated why I wanted to be a social worker. And I did have those feelings of wanting to help people. And you're quite right, it came from this sense of knowing I was lucky. And it wasn't anything more than that. I was lucky to be born into the family I was born into the community I was born into. And it was an accident of birth that we were born where we were born. And when I look at other people who didn't have that luck, fairness, the word I still use that word a lot, particularly with children. It's about being fair. What's fair? So if somebody didn't have that lucky start, it's only fair that we help give them that leg up, an extra leg up that I didn't need, and hopefully my children didn't need. So it was a sense of justice from a very young age, which was instilled in us by our parents. That's what has driven me my whole career, but that's what drove me around working with people. So you did your degree, and then what?
So I did my degree. So between school and degree, I took a year out to volunteer in a social work office because I thought I'd better understand what it was I was signing up to for my life. So I did that for a year, did my degree and got a job as a probation. At 23 years old, I was a probation officer working in Stoke-on-Trent and working with people. And at university, I did question whether I wanted to change the world
or whether I wanted to work people to fit into an unjust world. So I always wanted to change the world. And the way I did that is I worked as a probation officer with individuals, and I liked probation because you had a set term, a set period of time by which to work with that person, and the consequences were clear, although I, as a rule, rarely breached anybody. But we always managed to turn it around. I had a letter I used to send, a not good enough letter, when people were getting close to breach. That normally brought them in, even as a 23-year-old, sending it to 50-year-olds. But and then I joined the union. I joined the Probation Officers Union. So I did my Changing the World stuff through them and worked with individuals. I mean, I only worked in that traditional social work role as a probation officer for 7 years, mostly in England, a little bit in Northern Ireland when I moved. And then I got out and worked for the voluntary and community sector.
Just to stay with probation for a moment, because it's been in the news a lot recently, hasn't it?
Yeah.
There's a lot of concern about not enough people being involved, about privatisation elements of it and so on. I mean, what would your concerns be about something which is such an important role, such an important role that you wanted to do it?
Hugely, and bearing in mind I qualified in the 80s. I mean, well, giving away my age, but I qualified in 1987 and worked as a probation officer. And we always described ourselves as social workers with people who offend. That was our job. We did social work. We used social work as a way to help people find a different path in their lives. What I've seen happen to the probation service in England and Wales is very different to what's happened in Northern Ireland, thankfully. You've seen that privatisation. You've seen the tasks moving in different direction. You've seen that you don't need to be a qualified social worker to do that core probation task. And we're seeing the consequences of that right now. In Northern Ireland, and I did for a while, I was on the probation board as a member of the board at the beginning of this century. Northern Ireland always resisted that. Now, we can talk about investment in probation and all the things for Northern Ireland, but we've not had those scandals that they've had across the water and most recently. So I think it ain't broke in Northern Ireland, and there's no need to fix that core bit of the social worker being at the centre of that service, because social work as a task, as a way of working with people, remains the best way to help them, to support them, to stand beside them, to find, like I said, alternative ways of being.
So you did 7 years as a probation officer, and then, as I think you said there, moved into more of the voluntary kind of youth sector. And I suppose that's where our paths would have crossed first.
Yeah.
I think with Include Youth. Maybe?
Well, I was in Women's Aid for 3 years. So I left probation and joined Women's Aid and helped set up our paths crossed there, Wendy, because you helped launch the helpline.
I did, yeah.
You did the Women's Aid helpline in 1995. So I was their first regional helpline coordinator. So I did that for 3 years, and then went and wanted then to go back to working with young people and joined Include Youth in 1998, where I stayed for nearly 17 years.
How important is it for those young people? I mean, it was very interesting what you said about the fact that you were lucky, and where you were born, to whom you were born, your circumstances, and I must say I've always felt like that too. And you can take that point of view and think, well, it's okay, everyone's like that, or you can open your eyes and see what's actually going on around you, and that's very much what I think you were doing with Include Youth.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right, and it was saying, and again, the reason I loved Include Youth and how lucky I know to have worked there, where I rarely didn't want to go to work, woke up in the morning, and I'm a very grumpy morning person, but it was that standing beside young people and working with them, saying to them, no, it's not been fair for you, but let's work out what you can do to make it fairer, whilst at the same time taking their experiences and speaking truth to power, either with the young people or on our own as adults. And I love that. I love that you could work with the young people whilst using what they were telling you and helping them to change the systems to make it better. And you don't necessarily talk with young people, say, you've had bad luck. You say you've not had a fair start. What bits of it can you change? And then what bits of the system do we need to change, and then bring the two together? And I loved that. And working with young people is joyous. It still is, and when I do my job, it's joyous. And I talk about it. we would see them coming into inclusion with their heads down. And as I could see them coming in to do whatever it was they were doing with stuff, their heads would lift. You could literally, it was a physical thing as well as an emotion. You would see their heads lift and their shoulders go back, and they would become proud of being them. And they would refuse the labels other people were putting on them of being a herd, of being a problem, of being whatever. And they would wear their own labels. They would write their own script. And I just loved seeing that. And I just watched my colleagues do amazing things.
So, talk about labels, hood, whatever, prod, Catholic, and they're young people in Northern Ireland in our very particular circumstances with this Greek Cypriot Arsenal supporting Londoner. How did they react to you?
So it works. So the English accent grates on some people. So I've learned to use it in Northern Ireland. So you can ask the silly questions. You can ask the obvious, the questions everyone wants to ask but doesn't. But because you've got an English, and I've managed, don't know how I've kept it, but I've kept it. So so the English accent comes out, but the Koulla Yiasouma and the Cyprus. So let's talk about divided islands. Let's talk about, colonial rule and all the rest of it. I can hold my own in quite a lot of those conversations. I'm married to a man from West Belfast. So I roll him in on an occasion. I live in Bangor, so I roll that in on occasion. I do what I need to do to get through. But I think that neutrality from background has helped in some cases, but has also meant I've needed to learn and step back and let other people educate me around this amazing place. But your history is phenomenal, but it's complicated, and and I'm still learning about it, and I don't pretend I know it all. I first came to Northern Ireland as a volunteer on cross-community holidays and had the most phenomenal time, with children from the Shankill and Ardoyne in a house in Donegal, having the best time. But they taught me so much about this place. And one of the big things they taught me was humour, how funny those people are, and how optimistic young people are, particularly working class young people, all young people actually, but that optimism oozes out of them and still does to this day.
So you were an original Derry girl.
Not quite. I wish.
That is one of the best episodes, the one in Donegal.
Absolutely. We did those things. I'm not quite sure about the toasters in the cupboard, but we actually did some of those exercises. Me and my husband were watching it and cringing, thinking, oh my God, that was us.
So what were your expectations? You mentioned that you wanted to run the world when you were young, and that you wanted to change the world as a probation officer stroke social worker. What were your expectations of a career in social work, and how has the reality compared?
What were my? That's a really good question. Did I think? Yeah, I did think I would end up being chief probation officer. God, that's a terribly arrogant thing to say, but I did think I would be a chief probation officer somewhere, or certainly senior manager. I've always been bossy. Always been. That doesn't mean bossy people don't necessarily make good managers. I'm aware of that, but I've always been bossy. I've always tried to take the lead in a helpful way. So I was club captain of the rugby club at school. At university, I played women's rugby at university. I was club captain. I was deputy head. I lost by 2 votes. Don't start me. Deputy head girl at school. I still great. So I thought I would stay in the statutory side. When I came to Northern Ireland, I did work briefly for PBNI, and then I thought, let's try something different. I was newly married, and I thought we'd give it a go, and jumped into the voluntary sector. And then I didn't know where I was going to go. Did I always think Include Youth grew around me? I went in as their director. We had 4 or 5 members of staff. I left with 50. It grew around me because I loved it, and we were working. So it wasn't that I went in thinking, I'm going to grow this organisation. I went in thinking, let's see what we can do here. Let's see how I can help. Children's Commissioner job probably was a natural progression for me. The way people talked, no one was surprised when I got appointed. We'll talk now about whether they think I've done a good job, but it was a natural progression. But I didn't know where my career was going to take me. I didn't know where my career was going to take me, and I will reflect on whether it's where I want it to end, now and in the next few months. But yeah, I am where I am. It's gone its own way.
So the probation, social work, include youth. I mean, where do you think you've really managed to make a difference in those bits? We'll come to the Children's Commissioner in a moment.
It's a good question. I suppose I would say include youth because I was there for the longest time, and because I still see people who tell me about, including yesterday, it was with a young person who's now 28 years old and talked about her experiences of working, of being in Include Youth as a young person and what she's doing now. So you never know the differences you've made. So I would say Include because I spent most of my career there, but also because it was the most fantastic job. The issue that as a probationer social worker, we don't always know the difference we've made unless you bump into somebody in the street who say, you really changed my life. So I think, and that happens occasionally. Like I said, with young people from Include Youth, that will happen. If it wasn't for Include Youth, I'd be this or I'd be that. And I think if I was still living in the communities that I worked as I would hope that I would still meet people who'd say, you made a difference to me a little bit, but you helped me in that way, or you saw. And I know some people have said to me, you told me I mattered. And that was all I needed to hear. So things like that. So I hope I made a difference in those 7 years. I'm fairly confident I made a difference in Include Youth, and the people and all of us as a team made a difference for hundreds of young people. I'm fairly confident of that.
So when you went to be the Children's Commissioner, what were the expectations there? I mean, people are a bit sniffy about commissioners' roles, aren't they? You'd get a number of different views.
Are. Yeah, they still are, Wendy. I think my expectations were that we would make children's lot a lot better. My expectations was that we, the team at Nikki, would hold government to account and make them deliver better for children and young people. That was my expectations. Whether I've achieved that, whether we've achieved that, I haven't achieved my expectations. Some of it's down to the way I've done business. Most of it's down to the fact that, for half the time as Commissioner, we've had no government, 2 years of COVID. But also, yes, you're right about how people treat commissioners, and I hope I've changed that attitude towards commissioners. But also the way people treat children and children's rights. We think we know about children because we were one, or we have some in our house, and I think they remain. Hopefully not as invisible as in the past, but I think they're still fairly invisible. And that breaks my heart. That breaks my heart because I don't want to say they are the future, they are our present. They are our present and we have a responsibility to them and we're not discharging that very well. So my expectations is the world would have been a better place for children and young people. I think it is a little bit from the point of view of what government are doing, but not as much as it should be. And I think other circumstances have pushed us further back. COVID, the cost of living crisis and lack of government. The one single thing is having no government in Northern Ireland has meant our children have gone backwards in many, many areas or haven't progressed in the way they should have.
I mean, during that time, and there are obviously enormous frustrations when you take on a role like that. And as you've just very clearly indicated, there are frustrations that you weren't even expecting whenever you started off. But for those children and young people, how were you hoping to improve things? Is it speaking truth to power? Is it having that kind of access?
Changing the system, so improving mental health services. So I'm really proud of the work Nikki's done in mental health. We helped provide a roadmap for how services could be improved, and government have been working on that. So that's one example. Education, I wanted to know that education was more inclusive and less discriminatory than it is currently in Northern Ireland. We know children with disabilities. We know children from working class, poorer communities. We know traveller children, looked after children from the black and minority ethnic community, particularly our newcomer families. We know they're discriminated against. We know they come out with lower educational attainment and a lesser educational experience because of their character, because of their accident of birth, and that's just not fair. So I had hoped that would have equalised a little bit. I had hoped we would have done away with 11 plus. I had hoped we would have banned smacking of children. I had hoped we would have raised the age of criminal responsibility. They were my big legislative hopes. We're closer to one and nowhere near the other two. So, it was about system change. The one thing I had hoped also was that children's voices would be heard better. And I think we're getting closer to that. I definitely think we're getting closer to that. And I think social media has helped there because children have taken control. It's not down to me, it's down to them saying, we're not going to wait for you to ask, we're going to tell you. And that's been fabulous.
What would you say was your greatest achievement in that time? I mean, most recently you had that big report, the looked after formal investigation, and that was a major piece of work, wasn't it?
Yes, huge, and just that was in the life of a child who is now 21 years old, who was looked after her whole life, and has been failed, without a doubt, and where those failings were, and we took a whole life approach. And that was the first time in the 20-year history of Nikki that we had used formal investigation powers. So, it was one of my proudest days when we launched that. When we launched that investigation on the 27th of January, and this is where social work, me being a social worker, helped with that piece of work, because I was able, from my background and also my background in youth justice, and understanding what good services look like and how our profession can support children if the system's right. It really helped, but it was my proud, and I was proud not only because I think we had honoured her story, but also because of the work we had done to make sure that those relevant authorities, and the Western Trust in particular, listened and said, "Okay, we will do better." Didn't fight me, didn't fight Nikki, which is often what happens with reports like that. They didn't fight us. And again, I think being a social worker, telling a social work agency, you could have done better and this is why. But also not blaming the individual social workers was really important for me, because it wasn't a failure of our profession. It was a failure of the system that our profession is docked in. A big chunk of our profession is docked in. So I suppose if I look back, that is one of my proudest moments, that we got that over the line. And I'm also proud of the relationship I've developed with this young person. And sorry, I'm going to be leaving her, but she'll be fine, because she's well used to people leaving her. But I've also been proud of how Nikki has followed through on recommendations. That we publish things and then we say, don't be thinking this is only 10% of the work. We're now going to hold your feet to the fire, sometimes literally, if I had my way, until you deliver. And I'm proud of that as well.
You got quite emotional when you were talking about that report there.
I'm a woman of a certain age, Wendy. I get emotional at most things, but I do get emotional about people.
Well, that's a good thing, isn't it? And we've been talking in other episodes in this series and with social care workers, social workers, people in all kinds of different areas of your profession. About how they look after themselves. Now, I mean, you're a bit of a toughie, but that doesn't make a difference, does it? No. Toughies like us have tears as well.
And I think, I don't think it always helps to burst into tears. Because I think, particularly when somebody's telling you their story, what good are your tears? They need your action. They don't need you to cry all over them. But I think what people also respond to is authenticity. So, I do try to hold it back. I don't cry on demand. But I think, when people think about me, they do think about passion and commitment. And as I've grown older, I can't control the tears. And sometimes they're tears of frustration, but more often than not, they're tears of sadness. And it's important that people know that they've touched us, or that, like in this, it meant a lot. It means a lot that the work we do. This isn't a job. I mean, I have currently a very well-paid job, but it is a vocation. It is a vocation that I chose when I was 13 years old, and it's very, very much my heart. this is very much my heart and has been a passion. And I think it's okay to show that because you're showing yourself and you're showing what motivates you. And I am very lucky, about looking after myself. I have a family who loves me. I have a husband who looks after me. I have friends who say, right, wind your neck in now. Let's have fun, and it doesn't matter who you think you are. So I know that when I leave work or switch the computer off, that I can go into somewhere that just loves me for being me. And that goes back to that luck thing, Wendy, that I know they won't abandon me either. It's my good friends, my husband and my children. My football team definitely will abandon me, but the rest won't. And that's a really good, solid base. That's such a, and that's that security I've had since birth. I've had that security since birth. And that means you can put your head above the parapet a little bit more than some others might feel able to.
What about influencers? That's a word that didn't exist until recently, really, did it? But what support did you get? And when you've mentioned some of the support that you do get now, and what were the big influences? Who were there people who really encouraged you? Who were your mentors, your role models, or whatever along the way?
Yeah, so when I think about my early career as a probation officer particularly, so there was a couple of people, one in the office in Stoke-on-Trent, another in the office in Hackney, who were strong, old school trade unionists. And so I really responded well to that zeal for social change and social justice, and really, really enjoyed that. But they were really good at what they did as probation officers. So I loved that they were heroes, but also took the time to mentor me and stand beside me because they knew I had similar interests. I'm very, very grateful to those two women. I can see them very vividly. One was called Jane Morris, and every time Jane Morris here and all that, I know her, Jane Morris, who I love so much. So and they've stayed with me. 30 years later, I still remember vividly how I thought I can do what you're doing, and then you get inspiration. I've had lots of support since I came to Northern Ireland from colleagues. In similar roles as me. I meet two women for breakfast every so often who, again, were in the same game and who you just go, you know what women are like, but you just come out thinking, oh, I'm so glad. And it's safe and you can do that. Friends who also inspire me. So you pick your heroes. And young people as well. I talked about the young woman yesterday. I always say they are the fuel. For me, young people, through this job, through the worst of times with all this nonsense with our political situation, young people have fueled me. They have continued to fan those flames, to keep me doing, and all of us at Nicky keep doing our work. Sounds trite, but it genuinely is real. Often in a class, you see that little sparky kid and they give you the look and they think, I'm not going to let you get away with it. I just love all that. I love that. I'll not take nonsense from adults, but from children, because they're so genuine and it's about their lives. So, old and young.
So for the people who regard you as a hero, perhaps,
get a grip.
Not a bit of it. I mean, what would your words of wisdom be to them if they want to maybe have a career in social work or in social care or in probation? Where do they start?
So do it, is what I would say, is do it. We need you. I cannot tell you, and if you look at our report, that young woman talks about those social workers and how important they were. And when a key social worker left her, she talked about feeling lost. How amazing to make that difference. Do the job. So find your route in. Volunteer, test, put your toe in the water, through volunteering or internships or whatever. And then, there's the route into qualification. But anyone who's thinking about it, even if you're only thinking about it, please pursue it and find out more. And speak to people. So whether it's at Social Care Council, whether it's at BASWA or stop me on the street, people do. But, speak to people about what it's like. And hopefully, if you look at my career, social work isn't one thing or two things, social work and probation. It's many, many things. It's what it gives you. It's the professional value base from which you will grow as yourself.
So you are, as we started off, still a registered social worker.
I am indeed.
You're about to not be the Commissioner for Children and Young People in Northern Ireland anymore. So what's next?
So I don't know. So
Manage a football club?
Well, no. I know Mikel Arteta's doing a great job, absolutely brilliant job. So I'm going to take a big break. I think I can still be registered even though I'm not working. So I will maintain, but I'm going to take a break. Garden, do my garden, clean my cupboards, spend time with my family, particularly my mother. We're going on a big holiday, and then I'll see what comes next. I'm really lucky that I can afford to do that we can afford to do that. Our girls are a bit older. They're now nearly financially independent. I'm touching wood. Listeners, I'm touching wood. I'm still, they're still working me. I'm still passionate about rights, human rights generally, children's rights particularly. But I am really looking forward to having a break. But I'm not going anywhere. I'm not leaving Northern Ireland. And I'm not leaving the system. I will continue to work in it in some form. But we'll wait. I can't wait to see what that will be.
And do you still think you could change the world?
I think now, I hope I can. But what I see my future in is helping others to change the world as I get a little bit older. I hope I still have a role in changing the world. But I think I'm quite comfortable in supporting others to change it. That mentoring thing. I think we've got such a bright generation coming up, and 2 generations behind me as well, the young people. I'd like to be part of helping them change the world. That's where I see the rest of my career going. Absolutely. The world needs to be changed, Wendy. It needs to be changed, and we all have a role to play to making that happen.
And you are a social worker, and you can make a difference.
Always. Always.
Koulla Yiasouma, thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Wendy. Thanks very much.
This has been Care to Chat, a podcast from the Northern Ireland Social Care Council. Thank you so much for listening. And if you'd like to learn more about careers in social care and social work, visit niscc.info, where you can find inspirational stories, great learning resources, podcasts, and much more.